the human brain is a mysterious thing. Now, no one actually knows that much about it. Even science is still trying to figure out things like how we dream. And there's a theory out there, or a myth actually, that people only use 10% of their brain, but unfortunately that's false. But there's still a core issue there we can still solve. Essentially, we want to create a super brain, and that's still achievable. We need to look to a thing called myelin that actually produces much of our skill and makes our brain much better, as well as helps us solve things like mental diseases and neurological diseases. So today we're going to look at myelin by first discussing the problem with myelin, second defining and looking at what myelin does, and finally looking at how we can build myelin. So first, we need to discuss the problems with myelin production and what problems we see in the US and in the world. So we see diseases in the brain in the US are actually caused by a lack of myelin and a thing called demyelination. So we see first that the National MS Society shows that it affects 2.3 million people, and multiple sclerosis is actually one of the most common demyelinating diseases. Alzheimer's, another one of those, is even more common. It's actually the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, and it affects 5.5 million people in the United States alone. What this shows is that millions of people are affected by demyelination problems and diseases, but that's not the only problem there. We also see that people struggle to be good at things, for example. Everyone in our daily life struggles. Essentially, we want to do things, but unfortunately, we just can't for some reason. We're either not good enough, or we're not driven enough to do it. People want to be good at things, but end up failing. For example, from the University of Scranton, which study shows that 92% of people that set New Year goals never actually achieve them. Furthermore, a Gallup poll shows that 70% of employees don't work at their full potential. Essentially what this shows is that we're losing productivity and we don't know how to solve it. We don't know how to be good at things. We don't know how to build skill. That's where myelin kicks in. Myelin is that key, and actually when we don't build skill, we're actually hurting our myelin production. So what is myelin then? Well, according to eMedicine Health, it says that myelin is a fatty material that coats, protects, and insulates nerves, essentially allowing them to quickly conduct impulses between the brain and different parts of the body. So essentially, it's like the protection in the neuron system that controls every action in our body. And what myelin does is act as a conductor. We'll talk about that further as well. Myelin coats the nerves of both the central and the nervous system, and the central nervous system, and the peripheral system. Essentially, it controls both what we perceive as well as what we do. So essentially, it affects every brain function. Myelin is actually the culprit of many neurological diseases. So we see first that the destruction of the myelin in the central nervous system is what triggers many of the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. We see actually here that most people in multiple sclerosis get spinal damage, and we see in this figure that essentially what happens from right to left is the spinal cord collapsing on itself and losing its structure, and thus causing more harms and not being able to do things in daily life. And also the VA reports that shifts in myelin production is an early risk factor to Alzheimer's. So we need to look to how myelin works in order to solve these problems. Myelin acts like a insulation, much like copper wire. eMedicine reports that the myelin sheath prevents the impulses from escaping from the nerve at the wrong point. Much like copper wiring, if you cut the insulation, the electrical system doesn't work right, and that's how myelin works too. If there's damage in the electrical system, in the insulation being myelin, that sheath ends up allowing electrical impulses to go where it shouldn't be, and thus you don't do anything when you're commanded your brain to do something. Science News for Students writes in 2014 that myelin is formed from glial cells wrapping around the axon like a blanket. You see in picture 2 here, essentially that we see the axon being extended out and from the cell, and acting as almost as railway for the electrical impulse to go. But without that sheath around it, the electrical impulse will just go out into the brain, and not going to the right portion of the brain in order to do something. So glia actually means glue in Greek, and it's funny because it not only sticks together the whole brain, but it actually does much more than that, which it allows those electrical impulses to go through. Myelin is actually very important to mental health as well. We see the National Institute for Health shows studies that discovered that those who had schizophrenia, major depression, and bipolar had a reduced amount of myelin in their brain, showing that these diseases are linked to myelin demyelination as well. So essentially, if we solve those problems, if we solve the demyelination problem, that becomes a silver bullet for many diseases. And why the NHI article argues that the thickness of myelin sheath can have a dominant influence on conduction velocity. This is corroborated with the author Daniel Coyle in his book The Talent Code, where he writes that the better the myelin sheathing, the faster our body works, and the focused practice for our neurons helps it build that myelin, essentially what it does. In Jeff Colvin's book, Talent is Overrated, he points out that professional athletes and musicians have much more myelin, leading to nerves being fired at near perfection. So one, not only does it cause having a lack of myelin cause diseases and mental disorders, but two, having more than the average person in myelin tends you to lead to professional sports and musicians. So 3, under the understanding myelin actually changes the world. So we see Dr. Stefano Simicropo shares that myelin is the link to curing MS. And the same thing with Alzheimer's. Dr. Bartzokos from UCLA says that drugs should target the early on processes before the plaque even builds to stop MS. It would solve the problem before it even happens. And also we need to look to what we can personally do, which is Dr. Eldritz et al. Recommends vitamin D3 supplements as it correlates with keeping myelin and prolonging the demyelination process. And Dr. Tavegia et al. Says that anti-inflammation tactics, as well as sleep and finding challenging hobbies such as chess, a musical instrument, etc., help build myelin. So we see today we've looked at the problem of myelin, what myelin is, and finally how we can change the world with myelin, essentially allowing us to become world-class athletes if we put this to the right test. So myelin is important not only for diseases, but building a better self as well. So myelin is the key there. All we have to do is go out and turn the knob. Thank you.